Welcome, a very warm welcome to everyone that's joined so far. We're going to wait a little bit longer as people are joining right now, but just a big welcome to all of you. Let me just call out some of the names. Ranako, welcome, great to see you here. Mukti, warm welcome. Kai Kim, very warm welcome here. It looks like you're from Sweden. Welcome here, at least joining from Sweden or from Swedish organization. Enik Erdin, apologies for mispronunciations, from Gesbank, warm welcome to you. Nalan, greetings. Gianluca from IFAD, great to see you here today. Vladimir, nice to see you. It's been some time since we've spoken. Who else? We've got some members of our team. Ibera, great to see you. From ENEA. Rene, great to see you. I was pleased to get your message yesterday. Great to see you. Godfrey, welcome. Good to see you. And Hannah, too. And Isilda, good warm welcome to you. I think I need to get my glasses a little bit more focused here. So a very warm welcome to all of you. We're going to be speaking in this webinar, which will we've scheduled an hour for. We're going to talk about board meeting 35 that's just taken place. My colleague Jamal will be speaking about that. We're also going to get a summary and some insights from our GCF Insight that was published, number 22. And we're going to hear from Marcus Sacanjo. Thank you very much. We're hearing from Roberta Piacci, Jack Cribb, Debashmita Borol-Roland. Good to see you all. Members of our team here at ECO. So really looking forward to this session. And thank you to all of you that have joined. Hello, Fiona. Hello, Paula. I see you've just joined. GIZ. Jackie, warm welcome to you. Margaret Ann, great to see you again. Thank you for joining us here today. I'm sure I've missed many people because the order that I've got them here, people are popping up in them, but a very warm welcome, even if I haven't named you so far. So my name is Grant Ballard-Tremeer. I'm the founder of the company ECO. I'm also called the Visionary. It's our new company structure. We're really thrilled with the new opportunities that 2023 is bringing to us as we really structure internally to be able to serve all of you better. We're an international climate finance and development consultancy, and we're quite uniquely specialized in the design of low carbon climate resilient projects and programs. We really specialize in that, not downstream implementation and such like. And we've been working in this area for over 23 years with an amazing team. Our team has grown. We currently have about 30 people in the company. We have specialist consultants that have really been providing great quality technical expertise to help our clients solve climate adaptation and mitigation challenges. And yeah, it's great to see all of you here. Please do feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. Appreciate it. Kai Kim, I see you are from Stockholm. It's a great, I guessed that right from your email address. Great welcome to you. Yeah, so please do introduce yourself. I'm going to briefly point out a few technical issues. One of them you can see on the screen right now. You can participate as we go along, posting comments in the chat. You can ask questions as well. There's a little tab in the bottom right of your screen, which is called questions. If you click on that, you can actually put in a question and we'll try and get to as many as we possibly can during this session. So please do that. Now, in terms of the agenda, We're going to have members of our comms and gender teams discussing the 22nd issue of GCF Insight. I hope you've downloaded it already. They're going to give us some insights into that. This focuses on the importance of gender in GCF Green Climate Fund project development. And it's a study that they carried out based on responses from 78 project development specialists. Then I'll have a conversation with Jamal. Jamal participated in the latest board meeting 35. We'll have a chat about some of the main findings that came out of that. And we'll try and answer questions as we go if you post them. And we'll see how it goes. We will have some question and answer time at the end. We'll have to play that a bit by ear as we go. Yeah, and we always get asked the question, will a copy of the presentation and slides be provided after the session? Absolutely. We're going to send out our webinar replay kit. Chances are that you're already signed up for our latest thinking newsletter. If you receive that, you may have received it from our messages, then we will definitely send you that, the slides, any relevant slide decks, the recording, and everything else that you might need, along with answers to questions if we don't manage to get through all of them. Yeah, all right. So I think we're all set. Did I miss anything? Anything from the team? No, there's some shaking heads. I think we're set to go. So let's get moving. So our first presentation will take place with 4 of our colleagues that are on the line, and I'm going to pass over to them. I'm not going to give very detailed insights into each of them. Firstly, Marcus is a senior analyst and comms specialist at ECO, based here in London. He works on many of our climate finance assignments, typically leads development of some of these eco research reports we do, including GCF Insight. Adaptation is a consultant here. She's based in Paris with over 5 years experience in climate finance and gender. Roberta, also consultant here, based in Milan, specialized in project design, gender mainstreaming, and capacity development. And Jack, a member of our marketing and comms team. He supports much of our client communications here at ECO and specializes in policy implementation, environmental legislation, and the Paris Agreement. Shall I give any background to it? This report we did in February 2023. I'll hand straight over to the team and let you.
Thank you for those introductions, Grant. Hello, everyone. As Grant mentioned, this portion of today's webinar will discuss our most recent GCF Insight report, the importance of gender in green climate fund project development. As always, GCF Insight aims to understand what's working and what's not working in the GCF process. If you have any questions throughout this section, please put them in the questions tab, and we'll try and answer them as they come up. This 22nd edition of GCF Insight was written as a collaborative effort between Marcus Akanju, Roberta Piacci, Debashmita Barao-Rowland, and myself. So why did we choose gender as our focus for the latest installment? With a number of experts on the ECO team working on mainstreaming gender into climate finance, we thought it a pertinent topic to provide insight on for GCF project practitioners. Furthermore, it's an important cross-cutting topic outside of the GCF and climate finance sphere. To contextualize GCF Insight 22, I can talk a little about the background gender research done to complement our survey. So why did we choose gender as our topic. When it comes to vulnerability to climate change impacts, this is not a level playing field. Vulnerability itself is in part determined by gender dimensions due to the differential access of men and women to social, financial, and environmental resources that are required for adaptation. As you can see, these statistics paint a pretty bleak picture. The UN Environment Programme estimates that 80% of the 30.5 million people displaced by weather-related disasters from 2008 to 2021 were women. According to ActionAid, women perform 75% of unpaid work globally, with 16.4 billion hours spent on unpaid care work daily. Unpaid care and domestic work is valued between 10 and 39% of global gross domestic product. Research from the National Institutes of Health states that the death rates of women and children are 14 times higher than men during a natural disaster, and that women are more prone to intimate partner violence and sexual abuse and harassment under the same circumstances. Because of these scenarios, we believe that the GCF is in a very unique position to further influence the promotion of gender as an important cross-cutting issue through its delivery of resources that help stakeholders, and its approach of operating with both a gender policy and action plan that aids stakeholders in including gender analyses and assessments within project development. I'll now hand over to Marcus to my left there, who will go into more detail on the project itself.
I'll be going over the methodology that we used for GCF Insight 22. As always, this study was conducted using survey questions and semi-structured interviews, and it was conducted throughout February 2023. The survey received 78 responses, and we conducted 5 interviews, 3 with external stakeholders and 2 with eco-consultants and gender experts, Ballard-Tremeer and Roberta, who you'll be hearing from shortly. This edition explores the need to ensure gender is a core focus when tackling climate change, as well as the processes relating to developing gender assessments and gender action plans for the GCF. By understanding where project developers struggle to integrate gender, we can then begin to pinpoint potential solutions, some of which have been highlighted by ECO's experts within this report. The goal of this study is to identify the challenges and barriers to successfully designing climate adaptation and mitigation projects and programs for the GCF that yield positive gender benefits. The need to integrate gender considerations in tackling climate change is obvious. You cannot exclude the needs, rights, and vulnerabilities of half of the world's population if you're aiming for a just transition for the future. Ensuring equal and meaningful participation allows more voices to be heard, promotes equitable decision-making, and identifies potential solutions that benefits broader society. So here's what we found. We've grouped our findings into 3 main areas. Firstly, respondents told us that accessing accurate and reliable data, as well as the lack of funds to collect primary data, are key barriers to understanding the current context of a target area. Without this information, it makes it very difficult to undertake accurate and informative gender assessments. Secondly, many people believe that the lack of importance, or at least perceived importance, of gender means it is not taken as seriously as other stages in the project development lifecycle. Without buy-in from key groups to mainstream gender, it becomes challenging to design impactful projects yielding positive gender benefits. And finally, there appears to be a clear knowledge gap and limited gender expertise. Not having an expert lead the process often creates problems such as a lack of participation of potential project beneficiaries. Ultimately, this can severely hinder the development of the gender action plan. Now, Roberta and Ballard-Tremeer will dive deeper into each of these findings.
Thank you, Marcus, and thank you for tuning in, everyone. So key question that we started with is when to start considering gender during the design phase. We asked this in our survey, and the results are quite encouraging. Over half, 54% of the respondents said gender is considered immediately. 24% said when drafting the concept note, and 20% of the respondents said when the stakeholder consultations begin. Just 1% said when the theory of change is completed, and no one answered that they consider gender as a last step. This is progressive indication that there is improved understanding and mobilization around how intertwined gender and the overall project design processes are. Thus, designing effective and impactful projects require an understanding of the existing gender and socioeconomic context, and the gender assessment is the first step towards unraveling the factors of inequality, overlapping vulnerabilities, as well as the opportunities in the target project areas. It can, however, be challenging to know what information should be collected during the assessment and from which sources.
Thank you, Deba. So we asked respondents what are the key issues they consider for the gender assessment. The vast majority highlighted two issues: access to resources and power dynamics at households and community levels, 83%, and specific gender aspects of labor depending on the focus of the project, such as agriculture, processing of specific value chains, fisheries, etc., at 82%. Poverty and gender aspects of poverty was chosen by 70% of respondents, national policies and regulatory frameworks by 69%, and sexual and gender-based violence, or SGBV, in the target project area by 39%. These results are in line with our experience and our expertise, and we recommend, and we did it earlier in our last month's webinar, and in case you missed it, don't worry, because we can share the replay kit. So we recommend to start from 4 foundational questions to ask and explore when approaching a gender assessment.
So first, what is the gender and socioeconomic context for the proposed interventions? Meaning, what are the general gender and social inclusion and exclusion issues among participating communities and beneficiaries? Who has what in the project area? So assets, resources, access to credit, information, and income. For example, do women have legal and equal rights to land and tenure? And does this right translate into actual ownership of land, which is an important asset and connects to other factors, such as access to finance and credit? Who does what in the project area, meaning what gendered responsibilities exist in the context of the project? For example, how time poor are women because of gendered responsibilities within the household and within the community? And what does their double work day look like? How do their unpaid care work add up with, for example, agricultural labor for subsistence farming? And then the last question, who decides what? At the household and the community level, and in the broader policy framework at subnational and national levels. Meaning, and this is crucial when designing activities and also conducting consultations, do women have an actual voice in decision making?
However, answering these questions, it's easier said than done. And many respondents highlighted data as a key constraint in developing an accurate gender assessment. Answering these questions adequately requires investment, time, human and financial resources to ensure the project is informed by a well-researched understanding of the gender context. Let's explore further using insights from our survey. So primary data collected using a robust methodology by gender and stakeholder experts in collaboration with participating communities and households is ideal. This is because when we approach a gender assessment, or rather any kind of assessment, it should be as site-specific as possible. The more we understand the context, problems, and the needs, the more we can tailor solutions in a way that specifically address our findings. However, we know there is often limited opportunity to do this, and that's when vetted secondary sources, which may not be as site-specific but are still very helpful, come in handy. However, it may not always be clear which sources to use.
I think generally speaking, while they may not always be comprehensive or up-to-date, national statistics databases are typically the first port of call when looking for the necessary information. Our experience is mirrored by the survey answers. We asked respondents to choose the main sources of information they use when conducting the gender assessment. 82% cited national statistics databases, followed by secondary data at 80%, and as expected, primary data was lowest at 72%, which is, however, still a high and encouraging proportion. Does this overview mirror your experience with gender
For a comprehensive gender assessment exercise, however, where possible, a combination of primary and secondary data is the best option, with the focus on being as site-specific as you can. Nonetheless, data access, especially primary data collection, is often tied to limited funding for gender-focused activities.
Several respondents and interviewees cited a lack of funds as a key constraint in developing a gender assessment. When designing a project, there may be limited funding available for the entire proposal, which means there's a much lower likelihood that a gender expert can travel to the target region to undertake primary research, or a local gender expert can be hired. Conducting a thorough gender assessment can be resource heavy, including high time and financial costs, and without a suitable dedicated budget for gender-focused project development activities, the scope and the accuracy of that assessment decreases. For tips on how to conduct a gender assessment, you can download the full report from the website or from the replay kit of this webinar that will be sent out. You can also check out our previous month's webinar on gender and climate finance and our gender page on the ECO website.
When the gender assessment is complete, we begin the design of the Gender Action Plan, or the GAP, which are the two parts of the GCF Annex 8 in the full funding proposal modality and of the Annex 4 in the simplified approval process modality. It is essential to ensure that the assessment informs the GAP and the program or the project GAP mirrors the logical framework and is an integral part of both the design phase as well as the implementation of the project. GAPs should include clear targets, gender design features, and measurable performance indicators to ensure equitable participation and benefits for men, women, girls, and boys, depending on the context. Often it also may be a tool to encourage women's empowerment through the project design, and a core feature of the GAP, and of actually all the work we do, regardless of whether it is gender focused or not, is that they should do no harm.
So what are the challenges when designing a GAP? This is a question we asked during our survey. We found the responses interesting because instead of focusing on aspects that may be perceived as more technical, for example, indicators or resources, many highlighted a perceived lack of importance of gender equality and traditional gender roles in some geographies, which can lead to weak policies, and this is a major barrier. For example, one interviewee said, the fact that economic criteria are often given more importance than gender. Poorer women are typically left behind and wealthier middle-class women overrepresented.
Equally, many respondents suggested that gender may be viewed by some, including some accredited and executive entities, as an add-on or tick box to the funding proposal, rather than being as a key consideration from the start. They noted that the design of certain projects clearly shows an approach that does not focus on gender initially, but attempted to retroactively integrate and align gender with the theory of change and law firm. This is a typical retrofitting approach, but we could perhaps peg it as an attitude towards gender mainstreaming work, which considers it less important or less technical than other areas, which are perceived as more technical. Think about finance, for example, or engineering. And it is curious to notice how these fields are also quite male-dominated. However, retrofitting gender into a fully designed project not only never or barely works, but actually increases the risk of doing harm. A respondent told us that during design, there needs to be more women involved to design initiatives important to ensure equal participation of gender or relevant line ministries, NGOs or CSOs, communities, as well as buy-in from national decision makers who might disregard the importance of addressing gender and seeing this more as a box to tick. This goes hand in hand in ensuring capacities are built and resources are provided to assure effective participation of women in consultations during the design of the activities.
That is certainly true. Diverse teams with diverse expertise and in-depth contextual, localized knowledge are key to ensuring gender is properly mainstreamed, and not only during the design phase, but throughout implementation and up to the evaluation stage. Would anyone be willing to share their experiences over the chat about this? Have you noticed improvements in your projects by investing in diverse teams with gender expertise or knowledge of national, subnational languages? It actually takes us to our final findings related to lack of technical gender expertise and low participation of key but often hard to reach groups. Our survey asked, in your experience, what are the main challenges relating to gender in GCF project design? One respondent noted non-existent technical capacity and lack of logistical means, while another cited often a lack of gender expertise, meaning those who design projects, conduct assessments, and development project documents fail to wear the gender lens, mainly due to a lack of gender-related sensitization and awareness. It is apparent that understanding the requirements for an effective and accurate gender assessment and gender action plan that adheres to the GCF process is a barrier for respondents. Many said that they would like to hire gender experts to deliver or at least supervise the key assessments and plans, but may not have the necessary budget. Interestingly, some of the points made by respondents blend several of the challenges highlighted in this report. For example, one person noted that the lack of technical expertise is linked to the low interest of some stakeholders to take gender considerations seriously.
And limited or untargeted participation is also a recurring theme within the responses received. Designing a project intended to improve gender benefits becomes incredibly challenging if you cannot reach the expected beneficiaries and ensure adequate, meaningful, and active participation. Yet an interviewee noted that ensuring comprehensive participation of all stakeholders, especially women in the community, was their biggest challenge. A survey respondent also told us that setting a target for women's participation is a major issue, as is the limited participation of women in decision-making bodies, which was mentioned by another respondent. Active participation of specific, often hard-to-reach groups is indeed difficult. Among Indigenous people and local communities, making connections with women and girls for interviews is the most difficult. Identifying women and their abilities for being a part of project implementation in some local and Indigenous communities is one of the serious challenges, as one respondent told us.
And this really tells us how important it is to design gender activities that go beyond equal representation, as in 50-50 representation, towards integrated interventions that promote women's empowerment and meaningful participation in the long term. But that cannot be done effectively unless a gender lens is applied from the beginning to the entire design process. And in turn, this requires resources, time, and expertise. It is certainly resource intensive, but pays dividends in terms of effectiveness, better socioeconomic and project outcomes, and more sustainable and equitable results. Eventually, the battle against climate change really needs all of us. If we want to achieve our targets and goals, we can't have only 50% of the world working on it. There can be no climate justice without gender justice.
So if we're to look ahead, our study highlights the main challenges related to gender mainstreaming in the GCF project design process. However, it's equally important to look for potential solutions. Many of the challenges are large and interlinked, and therefore should not be viewed separately. For example, changing the perception of the importance of gender in tackling climate change must occur if we are to achieve the impact at the scale required. In terms of GCF projects, we asked, what can the GCF do to ensure projects yield positive gender benefits? As expected, many responses discussed the need to enhance understanding of the importance of gender issues and the capacity to deliver on them. One respondent recommended capacity building in gender analysis and gender mainstreaming in all activities and budgets, while another mentioned that project developers should be educated on the need to consider gender issues when designing budgets.
Our experts and respondents also pointed to the need for knowledge and learning resources to help build understanding. Updating the gender mainstreaming toolkit, which is now about 5 years old and does not include sectoral sub-guidances, would be very helpful, especially to include new guidance on issues such as gender-based violence and sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, as this has become a recurring, and rightly so, question that has been asked in proposal reviews. Equally, publishing sectoral guides with potential gender-responsive interventions would give project developers greater insight into how proposed interventions can be tailored to sector-specific challenges. This could be mainstreamed in the very useful sectoral guides that the GCF has already published.
Finally, the GCF already ensures entities have policies in place, but they should ensure that the accreditation process not only reviews their compliance with these policies, but also their engagement and implementation of these policies to determine their capacity for developing projects that effectively mainstream gender considerations. While recent years have shown a significant increase in the focus on gender within the context of climate change, there is definitely still a long way to go to overcome the challenges that this report highlights. The GCF, as the flagship and largest climate fund globally, has a very unique opportunity to play a vital role in accelerating investments in gender responsive projects and programs within the broader work on climate adaptation and mitigation, as well as agenda setting for climate finance itself. So that's all of us. That's all from us on GCF Insight number 22. You can download your own copy by heading to our website if you'd like to, if you've not already done so. Thank you very much for listening to us today. If you have any questions, as we mentioned, just pop them in the chat and we can get to them. Back to you,
Great.
Grant.
Thank you very much. Fascinating study. Really appreciate it all. We've got 2 questions that come through the chat. Just to remind everyone, we'd prefer if you just click on the questions button on the bottom right of your screen and put the questions there. But I'm going to just pick them out. So, Kai Kim, we're just going to have just short answers from you, Debbie Schmidt or Roberta. Kai Kim is asking about differences between adaptation and mitigation projects from a gender perspective. Is there something radically different? What are the challenges for mitigation or challenges for adaptation? Do you recognize any particular differences there? Yeah, Roberta, go for it.
Yeah, sure. Sorry. Well, of course, every project will be different, even within the adaptation sector or within the mitigation sector. Of course, when we tackle an adaptation project, we are faced with certain specificities that sometimes are not present in a mitigation project. We may have a lot more community-based kind of work compared with a mitigation project, but generally speaking, I think the main steps remain the same. So there isn't anything that is massively different. Clearly, the path that, like, the main steps that we've highlighted need to be adapted to the context of each project, and you may be doing a little bit more community-based work with adaptation projects, but I would stick with the main steps. I don't know, Deborah, if you want to add on it.
Let's go on to the next question, I think, just in the interest of time. We have, Soma has really stressed your emphasis about the lack of data that's there, and she is mentioning that there's a huge challenge in finding proof that paying attention to gender improves, in her case, the Rio Convention outcomes. And what are your thoughts, Deborah Schmidt, in terms of, well, I mean, we can't speak of what is GCF's experience, we can speak of our experience on GCF projects. Is data a major constraint?
Yeah, data is definitely a major constraint. And I think one of the primary issues is that obviously there is quite a bit of advancement in gender work in certain sectors, such as gender and WASH. But I think gender and climate finance is still sort of fledgling. And there aren't indicators within, say, national statistics databases, etc., that would respond to the very specific data points you would need for a climate adaptation or a mitigation project. So I concur with Shoma that there's definitely data paucity, and that can be, of course, aided by the fact that there needs to be more investments in the design stage. So not having data is not an excuse to not have a gender responsive project either.
Okay, thank you very much. Really appreciate that. Okay. we've got a couple of questions here. Let me just see them. We need to push on, so I think we will handle those in the chat perhaps, or if we have time at the end, we'll come back and reflect that. So if you don't go away and you come back onto stage afterwards, then we'll come back to those questions. Yeah, so thanks for putting your comments in the question tab. The great benefit there is that you can upvote them. So if it's a burning question that you also have, you head over to the questions tab, click that you vote for it, and we'll see, and we can prioritize those questions. So Jamal headed over to Sondo for the board meeting, participated not so long ago. You've been adjusting the jet lag back in the UK. Do you want to lead us, Jamal, through this? Jamal is a principal consultant in our team. He's got a very long and in-depth experience with project design work, and at the moment is acting head of consulting for our team based here in London. Jamal supports development of a range of different projects, including Global Environment Facility, the Green Climate Fund, of course. You do work also with Adaptation Fund, NAMA Facility, and other funds like that. So you have a really broad understanding of climate finance, but you focused in here particularly on the GCF. Over to you. Please guide us through sort of some introductory remarks. We'll see if we can then chat about the main elements that you noted from your trip there.
I think it's working now. So thanks a lot for the introduction, Grant, and welcome everyone to the presentation. So it's very challenging to try and capture everything that happened in a 4-day board meeting in just a few minutes. I'll try to cover very briefly just a few of the highlights, and then maybe we can talk a little bit more about what they mean in terms of project development and the work that we all do. I think the key point from this board meeting is a rarity. There's a new executive director for the GCF. There were 7 projects approved, over $500 million worth of GCF investment plus co-financing. 3 entities have been accredited or re-accredited to submit project proposals to the GCF. They've launched the 2nd replenishment process to refill the GCF's coffers so that they can invest. And the independent evaluation unit has published several reports on the performance of the fund and the achievement of its objectives. So that's it in a nutshell. Let's dive in a bit into each of those and just maybe have a bit of a chat on what it all means. So the executive director has changed. After 4 years, I think, Yannick Glemarek has stepped down, and the board had an internal decision process that culminated on the first day of the board meeting with the selection of Mafalda Duarte as the executive director. Duarte is currently, and for the next few weeks at least, the CEO of the Climate Investment Fund, which are run out of the World Bank in Washington, D.C.
So Jamal, what's your impression of this switch? I mean, is there anything in, Yannick coming from a UN agency background? He's very process oriented. We see him really improving and solidifying how GCF does its business step by step. Mafalda Duarte, I understand, is is from a banking perspective. The climate investment funds is only accessible to the regional development banks and the World Bank. So you're anticipating a big change. Was there talk in the corridors around that?
It's an interesting one. You know, I think that there might be a culture shift. Glamaric was at various UN agencies for 16 years before joining the GCF. And Duarte's been at development finance institutions. So not just the CIFs, but also the World Bank, the African Development Bank for 20 years. And so, yeah, there is likely to be a culture shift just in terms of the way that they approach and think about projects and investments. I mean, that said, the GCF is now quite a large institution in itself, and there's quite a lot of inertia. And, you know, perhaps there'll be some learning that Duarte has to undergo as well to the GCF's way of doing things. I think that in general, though, you know, looking at all of the different candidates that were under consideration, and there was a lot of sort of backroom murmuring about who was on the short list, it seemed that there was a lot of confidence within the board that, you know, they've got a safe pair of hands.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
So, as I mentioned, the GCF has approved just over $580 million worth of investment in 7 projects, or 7 projects and programs covering Asia, Africa, and Latin America. If I'm not mistaken, all of the projects have at least some adaptation element to them, or are full-on adaptation projects with mitigation co-benefits. And this has helped the GCF to tick the box. They've were given a mandate by the board many years ago to have a 50-50 split between adaptation and mitigation financing. I can run through the list, but I guess the key point is that there were a handful of accredited entities listed here. FAO's got 3 projects. GIZ had 1 in Lao PDR. WWF has a project in Colombia. I didn't list the country name there. And then the World Bank and AFC, Africa Finance Corporation, both have programmatic funding proposals in Africa focused on energy and infrastructure. So quite an interesting mix.
Yeah, the thing that jumps out for me there, Jamal, is that there's only one direct access entity, right?
Actually, there are no direct access entities in this list. AFC is classified as an international entity.
That's strange. Right.
There was, the original portfolio was actually, I think it was 10 projects in total, might have been 9. I think 1 or 2 of them were not endorsed by ITAP, and that included one from a direct access entity. And then there was one that was withdrawn at the last minute for commercial reasons.
Okay.
So this is quite a shift. The GCF has also been under pressure to support DAEs, direct access entities, and this portfolio doesn't have any.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there were a few other things that jumped out during the discussions and the feedback from the board during the presentation of these projects. So this is one that is near and dear to my heart. The FAO project in Bolivia was actually supported by the ECO team, but that's not the only reason that we're showing this slide here. The other was during the discussion of these, I think 5 of the projects have something to do with agricultural resilience and adaptation. And one of the developed country board members made a comment to the effect that, well, agriculture is affected by climate change all over the world. And the GCF simply can't afford to fund every agriculture project everywhere. And I was quite shocked by that in a way and thought, well, that's ridiculous. Everyone has the need. But upon further reflection, the whole point of the GCF's funding approach and investment strategy is to drive a paradigm shift, to change the way that resources flow. And I think that there is an onus on project developers to think about how they structure their projects so that scale up and replication is built in, and that everyone doesn't have to come back to the GCF for funding over and over again.
Yeah, I can understand your surprise or shock around it, because in fact, that's what GCF is for. And the amount of effort that we put into the climate rationale to talk about really the climate impacts on this agricultural sector means that these are justified climate change projects, right?
Absolutely.
And each one is trying to get a paradigm shift there in that location. Here we've got Colombia. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I think one of the things that's interesting about this project is, I think increasingly project developers are including in the design of their project some mention of the financial mechanisms, and the GCF wants to know a lot about that, because that's critical to the long-term success and sustainability and replicability of the projects. What happens when the money stops? And if it's just a grant, is it all just going to grind to a halt? This project has been set up to include what's known in financial and economic terms as a perpetuity. So this is a financial vehicle that will generate returns, and every year those returns can be used to support the goals of the project, but ultimately is designed so that the money never runs out. And it's quite interesting. I think it required quite a bit of back and forth with the GCF to get it to a state that they were happy with. But it's just one example of this paradigm shift that I think the GCF is looking for in projects. How do we think smarter about how money works?
Interesting. But WWF's accreditation allows them to have some form of reflows. I mean, it's not reflow back to GCF, I suppose, but is their accreditation such that they're doing a more
it's a good question.
Financial instrument there?
Yeah, and this happens a lot. There are institutions that are accredited only to give grants, and yet the GCF wants to know about their innovative financial mechanisms. It is possible to have partners who are financial intermediaries so that the money's not flowing through into those entities, and there are lots of other clever ways that you can design it. It really does depend on I think the creativity of the various partners that are involved in the project to make it work. The other, of course, is to look at upgrading accreditation when need be, and that's another point that we can come to in a few moments. The third project I wanted to flag here is or program really, it's the Infrastructure Climate Resilient Fund, which was presented by AFC. This was the biggest project in terms of total financing, also in terms of the number of countries that are covered. And it was interesting for a few reasons. Despite its size and the fact that it's an investment vehicle, this project or program, is focused entirely on adaptation. And it's looking at adaptation of infrastructure, so buildings or ports or power stations or even airports. And I think to many observers at the board meeting, this was quite controversial. The GCF's investing potentially in airports. They didn't rule it out. So, I think that this one's going to bear watching to see how it evolves and what comes out of it.
Yeah, that's going to be fascinating. I mean, that's that you want to support private sector investments in resilience. It can easily take you into areas where it's a difficult decision around whether that investment is actually supporting behaviors that are not aligned with low carbon climate resilient development.
Yes. And so the climate rationale for that has to show then that without this investment, traditional private sector, cost profit maximizing investments would not take long-term climate change impacts into account, and that's going to have knock-on effects for the economies of these countries.
Mm-hmm.
So, interesting.
Okay. Yeah.
I know that time is not on our side.
Yeah.
Just briefly, accreditation was a big issue and topic of discussion during the board meeting. The GCF currently has 114 accredited entities that have been approved to develop and submit project proposals to the board. Two existing ones whose accreditation was nearing its end and who've been reaccredited are the Caribbean Climate Change yeah,
I always get mixed up with the 5 C's. Just call them 5 C's.
Exactly, 5 C's, and the Inter-American Development Bank, which had a project approved, I think, just a few board meetings back. The new accreditation was the Nature Conservancy, which has been active in a lot of the types of creative financial instruments that the GCF is expecting to see. 2 accredited entities have announced that they won't be seeking reaccreditation. They'll be engaging with the GCF in other ways, perhaps. And so the overall total number of accredited entities, as I mentioned, is 114 at present. The majority of those are direct access entities. And there are even more in the pipeline. And the Secretariat continues to move apace to process those applications. There are a lot of numbers on this slide, but I'll pause for a moment for breath. And
so many things I'd like to speak about, but maybe we should just press on.
Let's press on.
Talk a little bit about the second replenishment.
Yes. So the board presented and the Secretariat presented the facilitator for the second replenishment process. This is Mahmoud Mohildin, who is the executive director or former executive director of the IMF and a UN envoy. And he's leading this process and working with the new executive director to get support from donor governments in developed countries. The meetings are starting in South Korea in April. I guess the consultations have already begun informally anyway. They're anticipating a summer tour of donor country capitals to talk with politicians and other decision makers. And then there'll be a pledging conference that takes place in October, where hopefully they'll get the support that they seek. One of the points that was flagged during that presentation was that GCF 1, which is the replenishment round, the cycle that's just ending, had fewer donors than the initial resource mobilization. And they'd like to understand why, and they'd like to bring those donors back into the fold. There was also a concern raised about the proliferation of funds that have been announced in subsequent COPs. There's the Biodiversity Fund, there's Loss and Damage Fund, there are others, and concern about whether or not that burgeoning number will lead to dilution of support for the GCF. So watch this space.
Indeed, we will watch that space. It's critically important.
I could talk all day about the Independent Evaluation Unit reports. I won't.
You've got 2 minutes.
I've got 2 minutes. So the first report was the big one, and this is basically looking overall at the GCF's operations and the ability of the GCF to fulfill its mandate and to fulfill the various targets that are set by the board. It makes for an interesting read. I suggest you look at the IEU website for that one. And the Secretariat has responded to and agreed to take on board many of those recommendations. This covers also how the board meetings themselves are run and the role of observers in the GCF versus other climate funds. There was an interesting study looking at the effectiveness of GCF investment in African states. One of the sort of alarm bells that they rang for this one was that when you look at the national adaptation plans and NDCs of countries, they emphasize the need for investment in adaptation. When you look at where the GCF money is going, in African countries, energy access and mitigation projects are dramatically overrepresented compared to the GCF's portfolio as a whole. And they think that this is due in large part to the complexity of the process, the fact that adaptation projects are more likely to get rejected at ITAP stage, transaction costs, a number of other factors. And then the final one was looking at direct access, and a lot of the same issues arise. There are more direct access entities than independent accredited entities. However, the vast majority of projects and the overwhelming amount of money is coming via the international entities. Yeah. So something's
strongly underlined in this board meeting.
Yes, indeed, exactly that.
Not a single direct access.
Yeah. And so the GCF is putting more and more money into readiness support. They're supporting the project preparation facility, other ways of trying to get resources via these direct access entities. An underlying question that one of the developed country board members asked was, maybe there's a strategic discussion that needs to be had about what direct access is for and whether there are other ways of achieving those goals.
Yeah, it's a big challenge. We've got a few assignments where we're working on that sort of structure with direct access entities. It's fantastic to work with direct access entities, but it's a huge hurdle that they need to get through. So,
yeah,
great. Thank you very much. Yeah, Jamal.
Yeah. I mean, in the end, the GCF's processes aren't getting simpler there, but instead they're trying very hard to bring everyone up to that level, which is a heavy lift.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
fantastic. Thank you very much, Jamal. Really appreciate the insights in this. And we're not going to talk about that last slide. It's great. Let's see. We have a few minutes for a few questions. Which ones shall we tackle? Are there particular GCF related ones? I know colleagues have been responding a whole lot in the chat. So we've responded to many of them, or perhaps even most of them. Yeah, I think if we're not going to get to your question, we will do it either through in the replay kit or written comments in the next few minutes. I can't easily sort out which ones. I think 90% of them are tackled here. Carl is asking, let's try this one, around the accredited entity fee structure. Was there any talk of that?
I saw that one as well, and I was thinking of addressing it. So yes, there was in several different ways. First, the IEU study on African projects pointed out that in many cases, the transaction costs of doing projects, and especially smaller ones in Africa, exceed the AE fees that the GCF is, and even the project management fees that the GCF is usually willing to accommodate. And this came about, this was a discussion around the private sector as well. No solution was presented, but there is recognition that a one-size-fits-all fee structure may not be appropriate.
Yeah, it's a complicated issue, and also around how to design the budget. What are activities that are specifically an accredited entity might do that are within the project budget for delivery of project outcomes, and what is overall management activities covered by the fee.
Yes. One other point there was around the issue of accreditation. And if the GCF is really looking to double the number of accredited entities, but not dramatically increasing the number of projects that they support each year, that means that for each AE, there are potentially fewer projects across which to spread the accreditation costs, because there's this huge amount of paperwork they have to submit just to get into the GCF system in the first instance.
Okay. Lots of other valuable questions. Carl's got another one. I don't think we will get to it now. And my apologies. We're getting a few coming in right now. We've got 1 minute left to the session. If you would like to discuss things with us, engage with us, please do get in touch with us. Our contact details are easily available. There they are on the screen. We'll be sending out the replay kit, as I said. So please do feel free to get in touch with us. We also, I think my colleague Vidrana has posted about it, but if you're someone who's working in this sector, perhaps as a freelance consultant, would like to associate with us to explore working together on the work that we do, the delivering of projects that we do, please also get in touch with us. You can submit your CV on our website. You can contact us through those connections as well. You can follow us on social media and elsewhere. we're very happy to chat with people. So a huge thank you to Jamal. Really appreciate it coming on here now. Thank you also to Marcus, to Jack, to Debashmita, to Roberta. Really appreciate it. We have other people working in behind the scenes. Mariella, really appreciate all your facilitation. It doesn't get noticed, but you're there, making sure everything goes smoothly. Really appreciate all the time and effort that's gone into this. And of course, thank you to all of you who have participated in this webinar. I really hope it's been useful to you. I hope and trust it's been useful to us. To get in touch. And we're looking forward to seeing you at the very least at the next one after the next board meeting. So really appreciate your interest and your time. That's it. Any final things? Have I missed anything? No, just a few waves. Thank you very much for stopping by. Yeah, questions that we haven't answered, we'll send some written responses as well, along with the replay kit. Thank you very much for your time.